Tonight, we drift to the banks of the Nile, where a civilization rose from the desert and shaped history. You've seen the pyramids, you've heard of the pharaohs, but tonight we go deeper. Through 10 quiet chapters, we'll explore the rise and fall of ancient Egypt, its rulers, temples, secrets, and forgotten systems. Midway through, we'll pause to explore the pyramid conspiracies and lingering mysteries. Along the way, you'll discover 5 surprising facts. So close your eyes, and let's begin. In the northeast corner of Africa, along a narrow ribbon of life, a civilization was born beside the Nile, one of the longest to ever endure. Ancient Egypt was no fleeting empire. It rose, fell, and rose again for millennia. From around 3100 BCE to 30 BCE, pharaohs ruled the land for over 3,000 years. At its heart was the Nile River, a slow-moving, life-giving force of nature. Each year it flooded the plains with silt, making the desert bloom with wheat and barley. Egypt was bordered by deserts on both sides, natural barriers that protected and shaped its culture. It was isolated, yet deeply connected through trade. To the south lay Nubia, to the northeast, Canaan. This was not a single kingdom at first. It began as small villages and tribal communities, eventually merging into 2 distinct regions, Upper Egypt in the south, Lower in the north. The story of ancient Egypt began with unification. A single ruler brought these lands together, and so the first pharaoh took the throne, a king and symbol of divine authority. What followed was a civilization built on rhythm, the rhythm of the river, the cycle of seasons, the repetition of rituals, and the legacy of stone. From pyramids to papyrus, Egypt carved its presence. The people who lived here farmed and wrote, traded goods, built cities, honored their dead. They raised temples and watched the stars, developing a calendar, medicine, and mathematics. The world has changed beyond recognition since then. Yet Egypt's name still echoes in our imagination. It appears in textbooks and museums, in movies and myths, often twisted, but never forgotten. But beyond the symbols and gold masks, beyond the tales of tombs and curses, was a society shaped by order and duty, by water and desert, sun and shadow. Ancient Egypt was not just about pyramids. It was about systems, survival, legacy, and power. It was a world unto itself, vast, resilient, aware. And it left behind more than monuments. It left behind the idea of civilization itself. Before the pyramids touched the sky, before Egypt was even a name, the land was divided, distant, and scattered. A patchwork of tribes along the Nile's edge. These were farming communities, small and self-reliant, growing grain, raising cattle, weaving baskets from reeds. They built mud brick homes, worshipped local deities, and carved their stories into stone and pottery. For centuries, Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt grew apart. The south ruled by narrow valleys and cataracts, the north shaped by marshes and open delta fields. Each had its own symbols, crowns, and kings. But around 3100 BCE, that changed. A single ruler, known by many as Nama, brought both lands under one crown, uniting Egypt into its first true kingdom. He wore the double crown, white for the south, red for the north. And with it came the title of Pharaoh, a word meaning great house, symbol of divine kingship and eternal rule. This marked the start of the early dynastic period, a time when Egypt found its identity in stone. Cities formed, Palaces rose, writing was refined, and a system of kingship took firm root. The pharaoh was not merely a ruler, he was seen as the living balance, holding together the order of the universe, from the flood of the Nile to the rising sun. Power moved to Memphis, near the river's split, a capital where laws were set and roads began. From there, dynasties ruled for centuries, passing power down like sacred flame. Each king prepared for death in life, building tombs that grew more complex and vast. What they built was more than shelter. It was legacy, message, monument, and map. And so Egypt began its long golden arc, rooted in unification, raised on stone and rhythm. It was a land no longer of two lands, but one kingdom, one crown, one endless river. In ancient Egypt, the ruler was more than a man. He was lawmaker, general, priest, and divine symbol in one. The people called him Pharaoh, a title meaning great house, not just for his palace, but for the nation itself. To rule Egypt was to carry enormous weight, because they thought the pharaoh stood between heaven and earth, ensuring the sun rose, the river flowed, and the land stayed in balance with cosmic order. He was not questioned. His word was final. He appointed officials, directed wars, oversaw rituals, and controlled temples, granaries, borders, and foreign affairs. His face was carved in stone across the kingdom, and his name was preserved in rings called cartouches. His image appeared in tombs, temples, and colossal statues, forever gazing forward, silent and still. Some pharaohs ruled briefly and left little behind. Others changed Egypt forever with their bold decisions. Hatshepsut, a woman, wore the beard of kingship, ruling peacefully, building temples, and expanding trade. Akhenaten rewrote religion and reformed the priesthood, turning worship toward a single sun disk. His reign was strange, radical, and short-lived, but his name survives for the controversy it caused. Then came Ramses II, called Ramses the Great, a warrior king, builder of monuments, whose reign lasted over 60 years. He led armies, signed treaties, and fathered dozens of heirs. The role of pharaoh evolved over time. Some were powerful, others mere figureheads under priests. But the idea of pharaoh remained steady and strong, a king who stood as Egypt's soul and shield. He was buried not just with gold, but with texts, statues, tools, and sacred scripts. Each tomb was a gateway to eternity, prepared while the pharaoh still breathed life. These rulers left more than stone behind. They shaped how people saw leadership and law. Their rule was order. Their fall was chaos. And for thousands of years, they sat on the throne, watching the sun rise over the Nile, unchallenged, eternal. Though Egypt was blessed with natural borders of desert, it did not always stay within its narrow valley. Over time, the pharaohs looked beyond the Nile, seeking resources, security, glory, and sometimes revenge. Early wars were small, often with nearby tribes. Raids and skirmishes shaped the edges of power. But as Egypt grew strong and organized, its armies began to push outward with purpose. To the south, Nubia became a key target, a land rich in gold, cattle, and skilled archers. Egyptian forces moved in, built forts, took captives, and over time absorbed Nubian territory into Empong. To the northeast, Egypt faced new threats: the rising city-states of Canaan and beyond. Later came the powerful Hittites from Anatolia, with chariots rolling like thunder across open plains. Pharaohs began to build vast military machines, not just for defense, but to project dominance. They trained chariot divisions, crafted bronze-tipped weapons, and called thousands of men to the battlefield. One of the greatest military rulers was Thutmose III, who led campaigns into Syria and Palestine, winning battles and bringing back tribute and captives, wealth and loyalty from far-off lands. Then came Ramses IV and the famous clash, the Battle of Kadesh, against the Hittite Empire. It was one of the largest chariot battles recorded, a fight that ended not in victory, but in treaty. It marked a turning point in diplomacy and war, a formal peace carved into stone for generations. Two superpowers, side by side, choosing balance after decades of blood and shifting borders. Egypt's expansion was not endless, nor always stable. Its control over foreign lands rose and fell as internal struggles and outside forces gained strength. Later invasions would strike from Libya, Nubia, and beyond. Still, warfare shaped the Egyptian worldview. It defined borders, boosted kings, built temples, and filled tombs with tales of valor and conquest. Victories were painted on walls, enemies trampled beneath feet. The sword, like the scepter, was a tool of rule. And for centuries, Egypt used both to hold its place as a power not only of belief and beauty, but of steel, strategy, ambition, and might. Beneath the crown and towering monuments of Egypt was a society layered like the stone they carved. At the top stood the pharaoh, divine and distant, but below him were millions who gave Egypt life. Society was structured, clear, and deeply hierarchical. Every role had meaning, every person their place. Nobles managed land and temples, wore fine linen, and advised the crown on matters of law and wealth. Priests held immense power, guarding sacred rituals and tombs. They oversaw temples, prepared offerings, preserved order and tradition. Scribes were educated, trained in reading and record-keeping, writing tax lists, court rulings, trade, and temple inventory. Craftsmen carved stone, painted walls, and built tombs. They passed skills from father to son, with pride. Weavers, potters, metalworkers, each formed the kingdom's daily rhythm. Farmers were the backbone, living along the Nile. They planted wheat, raised livestock, built canals, dug ditches. Their lives followed the river's flood and fall. Food, taxes, and labor, all bound to its cycle. Even in hardship, Egypt offered stability and work. There were laws, wages, markets, and seasonal festivals. People married young, raised families, honored their dead. Their lives simple, but filled with meaning and tradition. Women held more rights than in many ancient lands. They could own property, run businesses, inherit wealth. Some even rose to positions of religious authority, and a few, like Hatshepsut, ruled as pharaohs. Children played with toys, learned trades or script, and were often raised in close, extended families. Homes were made from mud brick, simple but functional, cool in heat, warm in wind and night. Slavery existed, but it was not always harsh. Some served in households or temple estates. Others were captives from war, working in labor gangs. Manumission was possible, and records show it happened. Egyptian life revolved around order, family, and the Nile. Their joys were small: music, bread, perfume, games. Their worries familiar: drought, sickness, taxes, and time. Yet from this quiet daily flow, Egypt endured. It wasn't just pharaohs that made it great. It was the people, the many unseen hands who tilled the soil, carved the stone, and remembered the sun. The pyramids of Giza, ancient even in antiquity, rise from the desert like eternal monuments. Khufu's Great Pyramid once gleamed with white casing stone and still stuns with its near-perfect alignment and engineering precision. Built not by slaves but skilled workers paid in food and shelter, the construction used copper tools, sleds, ramps, and possibly a long-lost Nile branch to transport massive stones. Inside, sloping corridors lead to a granite-sealed chamber and intricate relieving structures. Modern scans revealed a vast, unexplored void above, its purpose still unknown. The pyramid's design reflects deep knowledge of astronomy and mathematics, encoding solar and stellar paths. More than tombs, the pyramids were declarations of ambition, endurance, and cosmic order, messages to eternity that still whisper through the silence of the desert. Across the sands of Egypt rise silent stone halls, not for kings to live in, but for ritual breath. Temples, massive and measured, stood like anchors in time, housing sacred rites, keeping order in a shifting world. They weren't places for gathering or daily prayer. They were chambers of power, closed to the public. Only priests entered the inner sanctums, pure and prepared to offer oil, incense, bread, and quiet invocation. Temples were not merely buildings, they were living systems, each one with outer courtyards, hyperstyle halls, sacred inner shrines, each space growing smaller, darker, more divine. Karnak was a city of temples within one. Its forest of columns rose like bundled reeds, each one carved with victories, names and symbols, painted once in color, now faded by time. Luxor stood aligned with stars and sacred processions, its path lined with sphinxes stretching toward the Nile. At Edfu, Horus stood guard in falcon stone, his temple nearly intact, quiet in golden dust. The walls of these places were never blank. They told stories in rows of sacred art, deeds of pharaohs, offerings to deities, rituals preserved in detail so fine it still feels alive. Even tombs in Egypt followed sacred design. Hidden in cliffs, carved into the Valley of Kings, they ran deep into the earth like veins. Long corridors painted with spells and cosmic maps. The tombs of nobles and scribes were humbler, but still honored with care, offerings, and carved words. They believed memory mattered, that name and image were bridges between life, death, and the eternal. Architecture in Egypt was both beauty and message. Form followed belief, but also science and scale. Sunlight fell on altars at exact times of year. Stone blocks locked together with impossible precision. They built not to impress but to preserve. They raised monuments for order, not for glory. And through these works, so much still remains. Foundations that held a world together in stone. The pyramids are ancient, but their questions are new. Even after centuries of study, the debates continue. How were they built? What lies beneath? Who knew what? Science, speculation, and wonder still walk side by side. Some say it's all been solved: blocks, ramps, labor. But others point to gaps in the official story. What of the foundation beneath the Great Pyramid? Is it truly solid or hollowed by secrets? Recent scans in the early 2000s raised eyebrows. They detected differences beneath the base of Khufu's tomb, low-frequency anomalies that didn't match solid bedrock. Could they be chambers, tunnels, pillars underground? A few fringe theories suggest massive vertical columns may have been used to balance the structure above, not unlike modern support cores in skyscrapers today. So far, no excavation has confirmed or denied it. Then came a flurry of attention in recent years. An engineer claimed to detect pillar-like voids beneath the pyramid's core using seismic equipment. Others dismissed it, saying the bedrock is uneven. So far, Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities hasn't greenlit a full dig beneath the structure. Some believe they fear damaging the pyramid's base. Others say the mystery is more political than practical. Outside the ground, there are still strange details. The pyramid's alignment to true north is precise, more accurate than some modern buildings today. Coincidence? Ancient astronomy? Or something we still don't grasp? Then there's the missing capstone mystery. Was it ever there, or lost to time? Why is the summit flat and not pointed? No records clearly say what once crowned it. Even the blocks themselves provoke quiet doubt. Some fit so closely, a blade won't slide between. Did copper tools alone shape such perfect seams? Or were ancient techniques more advanced than assumed? In the end, the pyramid does not explain. It only sits, silent, under sky and sand, watching theories rise and fall like desert wind. Its truth may not be hidden, just not yet heard. Until then, the mystery breathes through stone and shadow, waiting for the one question no one's asked yet. Religion in ancient Egypt shaped every corner of life. It wasn't just belief, it was structure and rhythm. From birth to burial, deities stood watch over all, their names woven into days, months, and monuments. The Egyptians believed the world ran on balance, a force they called Ma'at, meaning harmony and truth. That it kept the sun rising, the Nile flooding, the seasons turning, and the people alive. Deities were seen not as distant or abstract, but present in animals, nature, sky, and form. They had temples, rituals, processions, and complex myths, each symbol tied to order, kingship, and the dead. They believed that Ra, the sun deity, sailed across the sky. Each night, he battled darkness in the underworld, and that Osiris ruled the realm of the dead and judgment, while Isis, his wife, embodied healing and motherhood. Horus the falcon watched over the living king. Anubis, with jackal's head, guarded burial and mummification. Thoth held knowledge, writing, the moon, and sacred law. And hundreds more filled Egypt's spiritual landscape. These deities were honored in temples, not homes. Only priests entered the inner sanctuaries, cleansed and trained. Daily offerings were given: bread, water, incense, oil, as statues were washed, clothed, and carefully preserved. Pharaohs were tied closely to this belief system. They were seen as divine, born from deities themselves. Ruling Egypt wasn't just political, it was cosmic duty, a role to protect Ma'at and prevent chaos. The belief system was vast, but we speak of it here as ancient practice, not as truth, but as cultural and historical framework. It shaped their world, but not ours. Since we know that the only true God cannot be dependent on something. Beyond temples and tombs, Egypt was a land of thought, a place where observation, record, and invention quietly thrived. Their knowledge was not abstract, it served daily life. It guided crops, measured floods, healed wounds, tracked stars. Writing was the cornerstone of their civilization's memory. The system was called hieroglyphs, sacred carvings, part picture, part code. Each symbol could mean sound, object, or layered idea. Thousands of signs, mastered by scribes through long training. Scribes were elite, educated, and vital to Egypt's system. They wrote in ink on papyrus scrolls and ledgers, recording taxes, temple inventories. Through them, the state remembered and the culture endured. They didn't stop at words. They studied the sky. Astronomy helped predict the annual Nile flood, which marked the beginning of their calendar year. They divided the year into 12 months, each with 3 weeks of 10 days. They tracked stars, especially Sirius, rising before the flood. This cycle shaped planting, harvesting, and sacred festivals. Though they did not grasp the cosmos as we do, their precision guided time with remarkable consistency. Mathematics also played a central role in Egypt. They used geometry to divide land, measure fields, and to construct buildings with stable foundations and angles. They understood fractions, area, volume, and simple equations. Their engineers calculated slope, balance, and alignment. To build pyramids and obelisks required more than labor. It demanded careful math and method. Ropes, weights, ramps, levers. Tools of ancient precision. Medicine in Egypt was both spiritual and practical. Doctors examined the pulse, applied bandages, set broken bones. They used honey for wounds, garlic for infections, and described over 700 remedies in surviving texts. Some ailments were linked to spiritual imbalance, but others were treated with logical, tested care. Surgical instruments made of copper have been found: hooks, knives, forceps, tools shaped by steady hands. They catalogued organs, studied anatomy from embalming the dead, and recorded diagnoses on scrolls of learned healing. Many treatments, while outdated, showed deep observation and skill. They didn't guess. They studied, practiced, and refined. Ancient Egypt wasn't just ruled by faith and kings. It was also built on mind, record, and innovation. They preserved knowledge, calculated time, and cared for life, all beneath the desert sun, in silence and script. Egypt's power was not built on war alone. Its true strength flowed quietly, like the river itself. The economy of Egypt was rooted in the Nile, its floods, its mud, its rhythm of life. Each year, the river rose and left behind a blanket of rich silt across the valley floor. Farmers knew this cycle and followed its pattern, plowing, planting, and harvesting by the sun's return. Wheat and barley were staples of the Egyptian diet. Surplus grain was stored, taxed, and distributed by officials. Dates, onions, figs, and garlic filled their gardens. Cattle, ducks, and fish provided meat and trade goods. Work was organized around the flood calendar. When fields were underwater, men labored on state projects, digging canals, building monuments, working in temple workshops. In return, they received food, oil, and linen. The economy wasn't based on coins or cash. Instead, it used grain, labor, goods, and measured weight. Barter was common: bread for tools, oil for linen. Even taxes were paid in bushels and hours. Temples played a massive role in this system. They owned land, employed workers, collected offerings and wealth. A single large temple could feed and clothe thousands, acting as bank, employer, market, and storage center. Trade expanded Egypt's reach beyond its natural borders. Nubia offered gold, ivory, and powerful archers. Punt sent incense, myrrh, exotic animals, and spices. From Canaan came cedar wood and precious minerals. Egyptian ships crossed the Red Sea and Mediterranean, sails catching the wind toward distant foreign ports. They traded papyrus, linen, grain, jewelry, and carved stone, bringing back bronze, silver, lapis lazuli, and glass. Artisans benefited too, crafting for temples and elites. Jewelry, pottery, cosmetics, tools, all shaped by skilled hands. Markets bustled near cities, bartering daily essentials and luxury. Villagers traded produce, meat, herbs, and woven goods. Economic power kept the state running and stable. It paid the army, funded temples, and built tombs. Even in droughts, Egypt's system could stretch and survive. A balance of labor, nature, planning, and supply. At its heart was the Nile, patient and generous. The river gave life, and Egypt gave it purpose. Their prosperity wasn't an accident. It was designed, cultivated over centuries, and carried by countless hands. Even mighty rivers change course. And so did Egypt, slowly, century by century. Its greatness did not vanish in a single night, but eroded, worn by time, war, and shifting power. Internal conflict weakened royal control and central authority. Priests gained strength. Nobles carved out private kingdoms. Foreign dynasties rose. Libyans, Nubians, Persians, all ruling in turn. Each one wore the crown, but changed its weight. Then came Alexander the Great from distant Macedon, welcomed as liberator, crowned as pharaoh without resistance. Under his rule and his successors, the Ptolemies, Egypt became Greek in name, but not in soul. Cleopatra VII, the last true ruler of Egypt, spoke Egyptian, studied its past, ruled with skill. But Rome had grown too vast, too relentless. After her death, Egypt fell into Roman hands. The temples still stood, but their purpose faded. The old rituals ended. The old language vanished. Hieroglyphs went unread for nearly 1,500 years, lost in silence, carved into stone but forgotten. And yet Egypt never truly disappeared. Its legacy passed quietly into other hands, through architecture, mathematics, medicine, philosophy, and thought. Its influence echoed in Greece, Persia, and Rome. The calendar, shaped by Nile floods, informed modern time. Surgical tools from tombs inspired later medical learning. Its stories passed through travelers, traders, and scholars, distorted, exaggerated, but never fully erased. In the 19th century, the key was found, the Rosetta Stone, inscribed in 3 ancient scripts. With it, scholars broke the code of hieroglyphs and opened the door to Egypt's true voice again. Today, we see their world in fragments, in statues, scrolls, temples, and museum halls. But through those fragments, something still breathes and endures, a civilization that refused to be forgotten. It stood for thousands of years under open sky. It built in stone, ruled in silence, planned in stars. Egypt's decline came slowly, but its memory stayed. Not just in gold, but in thought, balance, and design. And as long as we study, question, and remember, ancient Egypt still stands, still speaking across time. In the grand halls of Egypt, where pharaohs claimed to rule by divine right, a different truth stirred. Among them rose a man of arrogance, a pharaoh who defied all signs, who called himself Lord of the people. But God had already chosen a child, Moses, peace be upon him, saved from the Nile, raised in the very palace of power, meant to destroy him. Moses grew with strength, wisdom, and divine mission. He returned not with armies, but with a message, to worship the one Creator and free the oppressed. Pharaoh mocked, hardened his heart, and rejected every sign, the staff that turned to a serpent, the flood, the locusts, the blood, the darkness. Each miracle was met with pride, until the sea split. Moses and his people walked through safely, the water rising like walls. When Pharaoh followed, the sea returned. His power swallowed, his legacy, arrogance drowned beneath the waves. In Islam, this is not myth, but lesson. It is a reminder. Kingdoms rise and fall, but truth stands firm. And the real strength lies not in crowns or monuments, but in submission, patience, and faith. Fact 1. They had dental problems and created the world's oldest toothpaste. Ancient Egyptians mixed crushed rock salt, pepper, mint, and dried iris flowers into a powder to clean their teeth. Their formula was so effective, dentists today say it would still work. Fact 2. Egyptian surgeons performed brain surgery through the nose. During mummification, they removed the brain by inserting a metal hook through the nostrils and scraping it out. It wasn't just ritual. They knew enough skull anatomy to avoid breaking facial bones. Fact 3. They had birth control made of crocodile dung. Seriously. Women used a mixture of crocodile dung and honey as a contraceptive inserted vaginally. No comment on effectiveness, but it was recorded in medical papyri. Fact 4. Pharaoh Pepi II hated flies so much he kept naked slaves covered in honey, just to lure flies away from him. He ruled for over 90 years and may have set the record for most spoiled behavior by a child king. Fact 5. They had labor strikes. 3,000 years ago. When workers building royal tombs didn't get paid with food rations, they walked off the job. They wrote their complaints on papyrus and sat in protest. This is one of the earliest recorded labor strikes in history. As the Nile fades into night, so does our journey through ancient Egypt. You've heard their stories, seen their silence, and now it's time to rest. But next time, we follow the river east to the gates of Babylon. Until then, sleep well and let history keep whispering.